Hey there, folks, this is Pop Culture, I'm Alex Pop, and the first two episodes premiered last week for the new Star Wars show about Ahsoka Tano. Beware, this review contains spoilers. As far as the live-action Star Wars shows on Disney Plus go, I've yet to see Andor, though I hear it's great. I thought Mandalorian Season 2 and Obi-Wan Kenobi were terrific, while Mandalorian Season 3 and The Book of Boba Fett were just too disorganized. They couldn't focus on one thing at a time. But I've been excited for Ahsoka, because for one, Ahsoka is my favorite character from the animated Clone Wars series, and because this is the show that Dave Filoni has full control over. And I could tell from the start that Filoni was proud of presenting this to us, because for the first time with a Star Wars spin-off, we get an opening crawl. Not the classic up and away style to the sound of the theme music, a more slow and ominous crawl with basic red print. It makes it feel like we're in for a grand Star Wars adventure, while setting itself apart from the core episodes in a way. Featuring the continued stories of several characters from Star Wars Rebels, Dave Filoni pitched this as a show that you can watch without having seen Rebels, but it enhances the experience if you have. I watched more of Rebels in preparation for the show, and I thought it was pretty good. Not as great as Clone Wars, but it does have some fabulous parts, like Obi-Wan's final face-off with Maul. I must say, though, at least the first two episodes of Ahsoka do rely lightly on your knowledge of Rebels. They don't say exactly why Ezra Bridger and Grand Admiral Thrawn both went missing at once, which is what the series is following up on, so that might have you a tad lost. So this is essentially a live-action Season 5 of Rebels, and the translation from animation is great. It's really something to see Lothal in live-action form, and the casting is excellent. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who I just learned a few days ago is now married to Ewan McGregor, she's quite good as Hera Syndulla, and Natasha Liu Bordizzo is absolutely perfect as Sabine Wren. Ezra Bridger only appears in these first two episodes in a hologram message, but I can already tell the actor they got to play him, Iman Esfandi, is another superb casting choice. He looks and sounds just like Ezra. The only minor exception, I'd say, is actually Ahsoka herself, and technically this would be more of a quibble with The Mandalorian since that was her first live-action appearance, but it's still a quibble of mine. Rosario Dawson doesn't do a bad job or anything, it's just her voice that I don't think quite sells her as the character. I would have preferred that they had gotten Ashley Eckstein again, but it's a minor complaint. Despite how great Clone Wars is, and the great sections of Rebels, I'm honestly not a fan of simply the idea of animated canon Star Wars. It's always just been a little confusing as to what the logic is. I guess the audience is the only one seeing animation, but through the eyes of the characters, everything is still live action. I don't know, it's just kind of strange to me. I am willing to overlook it, though, when we get something like the Siege of Mandalore arc from the final season of the Clone Wars, which is probably the greatest Star Wars we've ever gotten since Disney bought Lucasfilm. However, if you're going to make an animated spin-off in a live-action franchise and declare it canon, you better treat it as such. Maintain the tone, and not go full-blown cartoony. This was a glaring problem with Jurassic World Camp Cretaceous, especially the last two seasons. Now, the Clone Wars I don't think ever had this problem, but Rebels did at times. So I had my concerns as to how much of that might bleed into Ahsoka. Easily the dumbest part of Rebels was the Sith Inquisitors using their rotating lightsabers as little personal helicopters. I'm very poppin', y'all! Thankfully they never did that in the Kenobi series, and the mysterious Inquisitor in Ahsoka hasn't yet, and I'm not too worried that will happen. What is carried over from Rebels that I'm not really fond of, I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this. I'm not a fan of Chopper, the droid.
What?
Hear me out. It's the human gestures that he makes with those little mechanical hands of his that I find to be too unrealistic. Chopper shows up in part 2 of Ahsoka, and he's still doing that stuff, like a victory arm pump and flexing his robotic muscles? It's a lot funnier when it's clear that a droid has picked up on such behavior directly from humans. A perfect example would be in The Force Awakens, when Finn gives BB-8 the thumbs up and he responds by raising the lighter. I'll never forget the whole theater being in stitches at that part. I don't find it believable or even that funny with Chopper, so that's going to take some getting used to moving forward. And as the story proceeds from here, another thing to be done is to distinguish itself more from The Force Awakens, because we have gotten basically the same setup. It's two sides who are after a map that leads to the location of a missing important figure. And speaking of copycats, the MacGuffin itself is a metal ball that is unlocked by turning the edges into a certain position, and then it projects a holographic map of galaxies and nebulas around you. If all that rings a bell, yes, it is quite literally the map from Treasure Planet. One other thing that I felt was a bit too derivative from past Star Wars was the reintroduction to Sabine, where she's expected to make an appearance at a ceremony, everyone finds out she's not there, and then it cuts to her being free doing her own thing. As I was watching, I thought, isn't this exactly the same introduction we got to Leia in the Kenobi series, which already was an old trope in movies in general? I also wasn't a fan of the music playing as Sabine is on her speeder bike zooming down Lothal Highway. This is the only time in the whole franchise that the soundtrack has included vocals. I don't know what it is exactly, but it has kind of a Japanese sound to it, and it's really out of Star Wars style. That part, though, was the only significant flaw with the first episode. Overall, Part 1, Master and Apprentice, was really good. In addition to the slick fight scenes and the visual of these locations and characters in live action, the thing that hooked me right away was the two antagonists introduced at the very start, who are also after the map to Admiral Thrawn.
Of course someone else is after the treasure. It's the axiom of treasure hunting.
And they don't need to decipher the code to unlock it. They have Dathomir Knight's sister Morgan Elsbeth for that after they broke her out of custody. When they do unlock it, it's revealed that Thrawn is in a completely different galaxy. Interesting, because all this time, Star Wars has centered around this singular galaxy far, far away, and now it's about to venture into an unprecedented realm, a galaxy that's even further or maybe a little closer to ours. Or, I don't know, maybe it actually is ours? Anyway, so the master of these two antagonists is named Baylan Skull, played by Ray Stevenson, who died suddenly 3 months ago. And I think this is shaping up to be a great final role for him to be remembered for. He has a really savage introduction when he and his apprentice Shin Hati come aboard the ship. The captain demands them to be scanned for identification, and he replies, "Allow me to show you our identification." And they whip out their lightsabers, and he takes out a whole crew of rebels near totally emotionless. My presumption is that, like Ahsoka, Baylan is a former Padawan who got screwed over by the Jedi Council. Why else would he say, "We are no Jedi," mirroring what Ahsoka says to Darth Vader in Rebels?
Revenge is not the Jedi way.
I am no Jedi.
The difference, I'm guessing, is that unlike Ahsoka, who left on her own accord, Baylan was disowned by the Council, and that sent him down a darker path than Ahsoka. The highlight of Episode 2 is at the end, when Elsbeth assures Baylan that Ahsoka is coming for them, and he says that with so few Jedi left, it would be a shame if he had to kill her. And he doesn't say it in a villainously sarcastic tone. You can tell he means it. I believe this suggests that he's starting this separate faction of Force users, where they aren't required to suppress their true feelings, unlike both the Sith and Jedi orders, which is obviously symbolized by their unusual orange lightsabers. So this story thread with Baylan Skull, I'm really interested to see where it goes. It also looks like Sabine is going to be picking up on her training with Ahsoka, and there's been speculation that she might turn out to have been a full-fledged Force user all this time. Personally, I hope not. She's had a long list of victories and accomplishments without Force usage, so I'd prefer that she be like Han Solo, demonstrating that even those who aren't Force-sensitive in this universe are still not worthless. Some people are questioning why the fight wasn't over immediately when Sabine draws Ezra's lightsaber and gets in a duel with Shin Hati, but it's not like she didn't have any prior experience. She did once wield the Darksaber. And sure, it's been about 12 years since the end of Rebels, but I think it's realistic that the fight lasts for a little over a minute. She loses, but it's clear that she hasn't completely lost her touch. As for the fact that another Star Wars character gets stabbed in the stomach and survives, Sabine's stab wound was more off to the side as opposed to straight through her gut. But, even if it wasn't, revenge does wonders for the will to live. And unfortunately for Qui-Gon, he didn't have a vengeful bone in him. So Part 1 was a really good pilot episode, but Part 2, Toil and Trouble, despite laying some good groundwork for the adventure ahead, was admittedly not great, and not just because of the return of Chopper. While Sabine is having her stab wound tended to, Ahsoka goes over to her place to find any way of recovering what Sabine learned from the map before Shin Hati and her robots got a hold of it. When she's there, she has a brief encounter with one of the robots that Sabine fought, and after knocking its head off, she's like, "I was hoping you'd still be here." My question? Why did it stay there? What was stopping it from just leaving with Shin Hati the night before? Sure, it lost a foot, but that didn't stop it from jumping down from the ceiling behind Ahsoka, so what was the point in just hanging around? No pun intended. Some contrivances like that made it less engaging, but not nearly bad enough for me to immediately check out. The best Star Wars shows still have their weak points. As great as Season 2 of The Mandalorian was, I personally hated the second episode, The Passenger. And Obi-Wan Kenobi had Part 4, which saw Obi-Wan stuffing Leia inside of his coat and walking around the terminal unnoticed. And finally, in regards to the titular character, it's a little unclear at this point what Ahsoka's character arc is, but I think I have an idea. Her deal is that she's become sort of a drifter. Sabine asks her where she calls home, and she replies that the ship is home enough to her, and that she just kind of goes here and there wherever she's needed. I would assess from that maybe she's wrestling with some inner demons because of what became of Anakin. We do know that Anakin is going to be a part of this show. Whether it be in flashback or him appearing in Force Ghost form remains to be seen. I'd say probably both. Now, Ahsoka has to know at this point that Anakin was redeemed. I can't imagine Luke wouldn't have told her about it when the two of them met in the Book of Boba Fett. So what I'm picking up from this is that she wonders if the state of the galaxy over the last 30 years might have been different had she stayed with the Jedi Order, had she stayed with Anakin. Could she have done anything to help him? And if so, would there have ever even been an Empire? I think this would be the start of a truly interesting story arc for her, if that is indeed the direction it's going. One other question I have that may be a little off subject, but I think deserves answering in this show. Ahsoka met with Luke on that planet where he was training Grogu in the Book of Boba Fett, in an episode that had practically nothing to do with Boba Fett, I might add. But previously, in her episode of The Mandalorian, she directed Din Djarin to the planet Tython, where Grogu could reach out through the Force to call for a Jedi, but she had her doubts as to if they'd be successful because of how few Jedi are left. So when and how exactly did Ahsoka learn about Luke Skywalker? It would have had to have been after Mandalorian Season 2, otherwise she would have directed Din Djarin to Luke specifically in the first place. Whatever the case, I really enjoyed the first episode of this show. The second episode to a lesser extent, but they both lay enticing groundwork for the rest of the show ahead, and I'm excited to see where it goes over this next month. If Obi-Wan Kenobi and the first two episodes of The Mandalorian are any indication, the third episode is usually where things start getting really juicy. So hopefully I'll have my review out sooner than the morning of the following episode's premiere. Work is a drag. That's a wrap, thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this review, and let me know what you thought of the first two episodes of Ahsoka in the comments below. Like and share, subscribe for more. This is Pop Culture, I'm Alex Pop.